It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying, by rayrae118. Chapter 11, A Friendly Interlude, my personal reading. Susan had a lot to think about. Top of her list was the new relationship her aunt appeared to be in, or headed towards. But a close second was Harry Potter. She had been surprised to receive an invitation to his home, but had been so happy to be included, especially when it meant she got to meet this new man in her aunt's life. She liked Sirius a lot. He was kind and funny and clearly cared a great deal for both Harry and her aunt. She looked forward to getting to know him better. He had told her a few things about her parents. The stories he had shared with her were new, things her aunt hadn't shared. While he had explained that he hadn't known them that well, they had been much older than him. He had worked with them a lot towards the end of the war. Susan may have been practical and down to earth, especially for Hufflepuff, but she was also a teenage girl. She was certainly aware that the boys she had spent the afternoon with were growing up as well. Harry appeared much healthier than he had been the previous term, though he had mentioned seeing Poppy, so she figured that was why. What she had heard about his home life was so horrible it made her want to hex someone, preferably his relatives. She was glad her aunt was helping him, and she definitely wanted to cultivate this new friendship. That's all she knew it would be, though, and she was fine with that. While Harry would definitely be a heartthrob that she knew many girls would fight over in the coming school year, she had seen the way he looked at the youngest Weasley. If they weren't an item yet, they would be by Christmas. She would bet anything. Besides, she was more interested in the shy dorm mate. Neville was also growing up, and growing up well. She would definitely make an effort to write to him this summer, and hopefully they could spend some more time getting to know each other. Hermione waited until she was alone in her room before she gave in to the tears. Hearing about Harry's summer just made her so angry. How could anyone do such horrible things to an innocent child? Her tears spent, Hermione sat back up and made a promise to herself. Harry Potter was her best friend, and she would stand beside him always. She was glad that he had gotten out of that situation, though it was a blow to her belief in authority to hear that Dumbledore had left him there, and then not even bothered to check up on him. She pulled out the book Harry had lent her and smiled. Harry had sworn that potion making for dummies had taught him more than Snape ever had. With an hour or two before dinner, Hermione settled down to read. In the back of her mind, she wondered how much convincing it would take for her parents to get their house hooked up to the Floo network. It would be so much easier to work her way through that library if she didn't have to go to the leaky cauldron to use their Floo all the time. Molly Weasley looked up, relieved, when her two youngest children stepped out of the fireplace. She knew they were growing up, but they had been gone much longer than expected. She had been a little apprehensive of letting them wander around Muggle London on their own, but she had known it was a lost cause the moment Arthur had heard. He had implored them to bring back stories and ask for some definitions on various items. She smiled, setting down her knitting. "Hello, you two. How was the excursion?" Ron and Ginny looked at each other guiltily. They hoped they would be able to leave the house again this summer, once their mother realised they had lied to her. About that, Mum." Ron started, but Ginny cut him off. "We didn't actually go to London. Harry invited us back to his home." This confused Molly. "You two went to Surrey?" Her voice raised an octave. Ginny shook her head. "Harry's not living with his aunt and uncle anymore," she explained, hurrying on before Molly could say anything. "It's a bit of a long story, but Harry doesn't want a lot of people to know. He doesn't want to advertise it, and he doesn't want people to find out what happened." Molly took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. And what happened? She asked in that dangerous tone that both her children knew meant business. Ginny sat down, pulling Ron down with her as she spoke. Her words quavered with distress and anger. She quickly summed up Harry's childhood, before briefly touching upon Vernon's explosion and Harry's departure. She didn't mention Sirius just yet, but she told her mother that McGonagall had gotten the DMLE and DCW involved, and officially taken over Harry's guardianship. She stressed how much happier Harry was, and how good he looked. She told Molly how Madame Pomfrey had looked him over, and healed several old injuries, and a few new ones, before putting him on a potions regimen that would deal with his weight issues. To say Molly was angry would be an understatement. She was furious, and even more so when her daughter told her that Dumbledore had placed Harry with his aunt and uncle illegally, since he really had no authority to do so, and had completely ignored any will that may have been in place. And then, to make matters worse, he hadn't even checked up on the boy for 10 years. Molly hugged her children, thankful that they were such good friends for the poor boy, and sent them up to wash, while she went to check on dinner. She made a mental note to get in touch with Minerva in the morning, to see if there was any more information the professor could give. She was surprised that the Transfiguration Mistress had taken on such a role, but she figured it wasn't something Minerva would have done if she hadn't been 100% certain. As Molly set the table, she thought of the kind boy she had met for the first time at King's Cross several years earlier. Harry Potter asking her for instructions on how to get onto the platform may well have been the best thing to ever happen to her family. Upstairs, Ron stopped at Ginny's room, suddenly wanting to talk to her. "Hey, Ginny." Ginny grunted to show him she was listening. Ron bit his lip. "What's going on with you and Harry?" Ginny paused. She guessed she shouldn't be surprised. After all, Ron was used to being Harry's friend, and he probably didn't want to share. "We're friends, Ron. We had a good talk on the way back to the tower, before leaving school, and we've been writing to each other all summer." "But he's told you more than me. Some of what you told Mum, I didn't even know." Ginny shrugged. "He wanted to talk to me, so I wanted to listen. It goes both ways, you know. There are things that I've told him that I haven't shared with anyone else." Ron blinked. He knew he would need to think about this conversation later. "Do you like him?" he voiced questioningly, almost afraid of the answer. Ginny thought about it for a moment. It wasn't that she needed to think about her answer. She just needed to think about whether or not to tell her brother. Finally, she decided he deserved to know the truth. "Yes," she replied bluntly. "I do. Is that a problem?" Ron was surprised at her straightforwardness. It required a minute to think, but in all honesty, he figured she could do a lot worse. And he knew Harry would treat her right. "I guess not," he admitted, "as long as it's because he's Harry, not because he's the boy who lived." Ginny was a little surprised at the way he was looking after his friend. She smiled brilliantly. "Don't worry," she assured him. "What I like about him has everything to do with him being Harry." Neville looked up as the Floo flared to life and Amelia Bones stepped out. He set down the herbology book he was reading and went to greet her as a proper heir should. Amelia returned the greeting and asked if his grandmother was available. Neville called for one of the Longbottom house elves and asked for him to fetch Augusta. The two were only kept waiting for a few minutes before the Lady Longbottom entered the room, greeting Amelia in her typical brisk fashion. A pointed look almost had Neville departing, but he stopped when Amelia asked him to stay. "I am actually here because your grandson suggested I involve you, Augusta. I would like for him to remain for this conversation." Augusta was concerned, but appeared outwardly calm, as she gestured for them all to sit, and called for a house elf to bring tea and biscuits. When they had the refreshments, Augusta nodded for Amelia to begin. The DMLE head took a deep breath before carefully outlining the travesty that had occurred almost 13 years ago. When she came to the present, Amelia paused for only a moment before continuing. I have been in contact with Sirius, and I would like to get him a trial by the end of the summer. Neville suggested that I ask for your help in controlling the Wizengamot. There is a meeting scheduled for August the 29th. I was hoping we might be able to broach the subject then. I have copies of his memories, and have verified them as being true and unaltered. Augusta sat back and considered what she had just learned. The idea that an innocent man had been sentenced to Azkaban without a trial was not a pleasant one. She looked over at her grandson, who was looking decidedly nervous. Am I to understand that this excursion you had with your friends yesterday did not, in fact, take place in Muggle London? Neville shook his head, embarrassed. I was at Harry's. His Muggle relatives weren't the greatest, so Professor McGonagall took him in. Amelia cut in. I am currently amassing an investigation into the practices of one Vernon Dursley. Harry is less than willing to risk the news of his abuse at the hands of his uncle getting out, so I am trying to find something else to pin on him. I also facilitated the change of guardianship. Minerva was quite willing to take him in. She smiled. I think she was feeling guilty for not doing more for James and Lily. Augusta had to think about that as well. She couldn't help but find something fishy in the Potter heir's placement with Muggles. As his godmother, Alice would have been next in line after Sirius. She could understand not wanting to saddle her with a second baby, as she was certainly getting up there in years. But the attack on Frank and Alice hadn't taken place for almost a week after the Dark Lord's downfall. What had happened in those intervening days? Those were questions she likely wouldn't get answered here, so she forced her mind back to the topic at hand. Augusta nodded. So young Mr. Black was also in residence? She asked. Amelia nodded. I was there as well, with my niece, Susan. I can assure you that Sirius is quite sane, and recovering well from his ordeal. Augusta considered. If memory served her correctly, Amelia and Sirius had had a bit of a fling developing before his incarceration. Guessing from the way Amelia was acting now, she would bet that that relationship was heating up again. She turned to look at her grandson. What are your thoughts? She asked the young wizard. Neville looked surprised to have been addressed, and even more shocked that his opinion was asked for. He steeled himself and forced his voice to remain calm as he spoke his thoughts. Sirius seems like a good guy. Like Madame Bones said, he's recovering. But he doesn't look anything like those haunted posters. Harry said Madame Pomfrey had taken care of both of them. He looked down at his lap. I like him. He's funny and nice, and he definitely cares about Harry. He's also got a lot of good stories. He told me a little about Mum and Dad. Augusta looked slightly angry with this, but Neville looked up suddenly, a fire burning in his eyes that shocked the elder woman. He told me about how he and Dad were friends, and how Mum and Harry's mum were like sisters from day one. He told me how the only reason he got as good a score as he did on Herbology OWL was because of Dad. Hearing a little about his parents seemed to have brought such a startling change in the teenager. Gran, you've got to help him. His expression was pleading. He doesn't deserve what's been done to him. And if you've got the ability to act, the way I see it, you've got the responsibility to act. Amelia nodded, taken aback by the subtle chastising her grandson had given her, before she turned back to their guest. I agree that Mr. Black needs a trial, and I would be happy to help, however I may. Amelia was relieved, and she smiled gratefully. Together, the pair of them began to plan. With the way things stood at the ministry, she didn't trust much of her department to keep their mouths shut. She had a few auras she would get involved later, but for right now, she felt safer getting help outside the ministry, and Augusta would be a good presence to have on their side. Neville was shocked when not only did his grandmother ask him to stay, but she also asked for his input on their plans. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I like this one a lot. That bit with Neville, you go little Longbottom, show them that the lion's got his roar. I love this. Neville is the brilliant coming into his own story, in a way that's different from Harry, yet I think he was the chosen one too. Harry was the chosen one meant to finish off Voldemort. Neville was the chosen one ready to rally for the war. I love that. He was the general of the army. Harry might have been the hero, but Neville was the people's hero, I think. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, girls and non-binary